Who works for like a pyme, a small, medium-sized empresa? And who is like working for themselves, freelancers, autonomos? Okay, great. So we have the spectrum here today. That's great. So we're covering everybody because this topic affects everybody, whether you're working alone, whether you're working in a large company, whether you are working in a small to medium. You have different challenges. But managing talent is one of the key issues that we all face today. By the way, I'm just going to put a plug out here. I'm recruiting. Anybody knows any accountants or any German speakers? I'm looking, okay? Yay! This could be fantastic. Okay, speak afterwards. We'll talk about that a bit later, but I really want to thank Mar for coming all the way from Madrid today. Mar is from BBi, or BBVA, as we like to say. And welcome, Mar. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is going to be very interactive, so, although I'm going to be speaking about the sort of theoretical side about culture and diversity, cultural diversity, and intercultural competence, which is what we're here to discuss, I also want to throw it out to you. So if you want to ask anything through the session, don't be afraid to speak. Later on, Mar and I are going to have a discussion, kind of fireside chat, and we're going to, hopefully, Mar is going to give you loads of really useful tips and tricks about how BBVA manages their cultural diversity, because they are a very large company. You have hundreds of thousands of employees in squillions of countries. You're going to tell us all about it, but these are really good things to sort of learn from. So I hope we learned something this morning, and I thank you all for being here. Let's see if I can stoop. So let me tell you a tiny bit about myself before we move on, but I've been sort of like an executive consultant in intercultural leadership for BBi for quite a few years now, sort of formally and informally. Our relationship has lasted sort of like 12 years. So I've seen BBi grow in Spain. BBi is originally a Swedish company, but is now in Spain, and we actually work globally. So a lot of our clients are multicultural companies that are throughout the world and face different challenges. So a lot of work with mergers and acquisitions, a lot of work with people moving to different countries and relocating, and a lot of work, essentially even more so since the pandemic, dealing with virtual teams that are trying to connect and communicate with that barrier of that screen in front of you. Trying to establish proper communication with your colleagues has become the norm. So this session is all about that, because it's something that's vital now for us to get the tools to be able to communicate with our colleagues cross borders and in a manner that's much more indirect. So this is great. I want to introduce you to BBi, because BBi's specialty, apart from languages, language training and helping expatriates, the core for BBi is intercultural competence. It's something that we all know about diversity, we all talk about diversity, but when we come to actually upskilling our workforce and our talent, we need to really have in our minds the cultural elements, that cultural layer, because without doubt, we all think, oh yeah, this person is skilled in XYZ, but where they come from is just as important as what they do. And understanding that becomes more and more critical if we're going to harness our team's potential and reach our team's potential and innovate and create and really make things better. So this is what BBi does. Too many B's today. Too many B's. Let's start the video. BBi really tackles intercultural competence training skills for talent management. And in a virtual context, I mean, according to McKinsey, there are going to be 3 to 4 times more people working remotely than pre-pandemic. And I mean, I'd like to ask, in your roles right now, where do you stand? Who here is fully remote? Fully remote, okay. And then who here would be like remote first, so very close? And who is sort of like in the office? Who's actually in the office? Anybody actually? No, you see, no hands. Nobody's actually, if you're in the office, Marianne, nobody is actually really in the office. I mean, can we believe this? This like blows my mind when I think about how we were working just a couple of years ago and how we're all working now. I mean, it's changed massively, and we expect that our communication is going to be the same. We expect that those relationships that we're able to build in the office, we can translate to the screen. But it's not that easy. It's not that easy. You know, people that work remote say that they have great benefit of being able to get balance back into their lives, so combining work and family. But I mean, it's different for everybody. In my particular case, I don't see the difference now anymore between work and home. I find it really challenging to do that, but that's me personally. Other people may find it a breeze, I don't know. But you know, these are challenges that we face. And then when we think about how we are really communicating with our colleagues, this is where we have to think about culture. This is where, to get the best from our teams, we need to think about this cultural layer and what's really going on. What's really going on when you're having those meetings on Zoom? What's really going on when you're trying to look at productivity or look at, you know, task management or all of these things? And it's really important that we have even more clear communication and expectations. And thinking about companies here, you know, this is like a minefield, because all of those things that you used to do in person, like recruiting people, onboarding people, giving them their performance evaluations, I mean, really, can you really do that as well, you know, across a screen? It's challenging. So understanding the other person, understanding ourselves, understanding the other person is going to help us to harness the talent that we have in our companies. More tech is not always the answer. I saw an immediate rush at the beginning of the pandemic to say, okay, let's use project management tools. Let's use, Slack, let's use all of these tools. And companies were rushing to implement and put in place more tools. But you have to think about the human element as well. It's not just about reporting on Slack or communicating with your colleagues on Asana or whatever. It's about how do you really communicate. So we're going to talk about remote collaboration, how to make you more culturally agile and really avoid these risks of misunderstandings and frustrations that can creep in. And I'm sure you've all got examples of where this has happened, and you kind of get off the call and you go, what happened there? This person didn't speak up, or this person seemed angry, or you try and read between the lines of things that maybe aren't there. So this is to sort of help us understand. And we've done a lot of research on this. When you look at sort of where problems can occur, the obvious one, and actually Ma and I were talking about this earlier, is about time zones. When you're dealing with different time zones, this can create big problems. But I would say it's much more than that. You have to go deeper into this. Last year, we did sessions with Swiss and Spanish, and they didn't know what time each other took lunch. You know, these kind of like really cultural layers and observations where the Swiss are punctual to the clock and go for lunch at 12 o'clock and the Spanish are going at 2, this caused immense problems because they'd never actually discussed it. They'd never actually talked about it and understood what was going on between the teams. There was big resentment building up between the teams because, somebody from Switzerland would put in a meeting at 2:00 and the Spanish would say, well, why are they doing that? And of course, to the Swiss, it's mid-afternoon. We have to kind of it's a very simplistic element, but it's something that is really super critical to bear in mind when you're dealing with teams across different time zones. Language. This is a minefield. Language can be altogether misinterpreted, misunderstood. It can cause breakdowns in communication, not just if somebody is speaking in their second language, but also the way that they use language. And even more so when you can't really see all of the gestures and what's going on with the body language. You've just got the top half and you're seeing people just on a screen. Teamwork, this is the real point of the session, because what we want to do is understand our colleagues and get the best out of our teams. And we know that cultural diversity brings tremendous innovation and creativity. We know that it makes for the best teams, but still we don't know so much how to bring that out. And intercultural competence is the key to getting the best out of your teams. All of these, decision-making, time management, productivity, time management and decision-making, relationship building, these are all dominated by our cultural attitudes, values, perspectives. So we need to pay attention to the different cultures in the room. So with this intercultural competence, we're going to maximise our potential. We're going to get higher levels of trust and engagement, which really, in the corporate environment today, is so important because the talent war is dreadful at the moment. It really is. It's definitely, something that we talk about a lot with people about levels of engagement and levels of trust within these teams. Without intercultural competence, you really do see the engagement drop. If people are not understanding, you see low performance, misunderstandings, and mistrust. And I think it's quite interesting to say that intercultural competence is a journey. Okay, it's a journey. You start and you must enjoy the journey, as they always say. It's not the destination, it's actually the journey. You see, and we see a lot, that you can have people that maybe have a monocultural mindset. They've always been in their own culture. They haven't really had much collaboration with other cultures. And they may have things like, I've heard people say, the way we do it is the best way. The way we do it round here is the one that works. Well, that doesn't work anymore. We're all in international teams. We need to move to a more intercultural mindset. So it's going through this journey of minimizing the differences, having curiosity about why you are different or why you are similar to somebody else. And it's about accepting that and moving forward to have strategies to adapt. Now, we're never saying become somebody else's culture, because that's not good, and it's not something that we would say. But what we're saying is understanding, curiosity, accepting that there are differences, and then having the tools to adapt is going to make you more of an intercultural mindset. It's going to open up lines of communication that you never thought you had before, or that you thought, I'm having a problem with this person. It helps you in your understanding, okay? So our approach really to the challenges of these cross-cultural virtual teams is just thinking about the awareness of the impact that culture can have. That's the first thing to say. When you get lots of different people from different nationalities in a room, you have to just be aware of the impact of culture and how these cultural differences will impact on the performance of the team if they're not addressed. I think that's really, really important to say. We have seen in projects that we've done differences where, in a particular acquisition scenario, where they hadn't actually talked to the other nationality before they actually did an acquisition, and we had to go in and repair that damage. I would always say start sooner rather than later with this topic, because then you can avoid a lot of problems down the line. But if you have to go into teams where performance is really down, where engagement is really low, it's more difficult to build that trust. And really the three pillars of the sort of, fantastic working teams are this sort of, engagement, trust and collaboration, communication. So we need to work on those pillars to be able to really get the best out of our teams. So we're talking about culture a lot, and culture means lots of different things to different people, but in the definition, it is sort of complex patterns of behaviour, meaning in our body, mind, and in the world. And we like to say, it's the rules of the game. When I came to Spain for the first time, I had no idea of the rules of the game. I did not know anything. I knew nothing. And I think I was more of I thought I was international. I'd travelled a great deal. I thought I knew it all. I thought I could come into the Spanish system and get right in there with my Britishness and say, please, thank you, be polite, and everything would happen. And no, it didn't happen. I had to really learn. 10 years ago, no, more than 10 years ago now, 12 years ago, I was on an international commission for the Ayuntamiento of Barcelona, looking at Barcelona for the year 2020, and I was leading a team of 14 different nationalities. And it was the first time that I'd had such a multicultural team. And I couldn't understand why I couldn't get things done. And I had to realise that some of the cultures that I was dealing with placed far more importance on relationship building. And people like me, coming from where I came from, placed far more importance on getting the task done. So we had an immediate shock, because things that were important to me didn't seem to be important to other people. Things that were important to other people didn't seem to be important to me. So the team did not pull together. And it took me a long time to sort of work that out. But eventually we worked it out and we gave the report and everything was fine. But it was difficult. I had to focus on spending more time developing relationships with people than perhaps I was used to in my culture. But it gives you that richness. You then get back what you put into it. And I think that's the big message of this. The other thing to say is that, our culture is really set in us by the time we're like 7 or 8. So you think that, no, I'm very international, I'm multicultural, I know everything, but you're not, because you're set by what's around you up to the age of 7 or 8. All of those influences, family, community, food, music, everything is set by the time you're 7 or 8. That's quite a shock. That was a shock to me to think about this, because it means that you're not in charge. It's in you. So we have to really look into ourselves and make a little bit of a deep dive into what we think makes us, what truly makes us. Because once you understand where you come from, you can then look at everybody else and determine what are their values. It's important for me to understand what your values are. I understand my own now, but what are your values? And then we can make that adaptation. So it is everything we think is right and normal, but what we think is right and normal in our culture may be completely different to everybody else. It is this lens through which we interpret and we see the world. When you go into any kind of intercultural communication, the first thing you see is through your eyes. You go into it and you think, I'm expecting this type of behaviour. I'm expecting this type of value. I'm expecting this type of attitude. And when you don't get it, you're shocked. But actually, we shouldn't be shocked at all, because it's what's normal through the other person's cultural lens. The way we do things around here, and I want to expand on this culture thing, because It's not just about where we have been born or what we have been through or our experiences, but there are different areas of culture. It can be an organisational culture. I'm sure that, BBVA has an organisational culture. A lot of the companies that we work with have their own culture. I used the example last time of the tech company. And the tech company, the girl gets the job, the woman gets the job in the tech company, and the guy goes, "You're going to love this. We go out for beers every Friday night at 6. And she's like, "Oh my God, I don't want to because I've got 2 kids at home." There's the organisational culture as well. I can see people nodding in the audience. I think they've got that one. We have to think it's all around us and it's all encompassing. And it's really interesting when you dive much deeper, because what we see is visible culture. It's only about 10%. So when I walk into a room or when I'm seeing somebody on a screen, I'm only getting a fraction of what that person is about. I think if you keep that in your head when you're having your interactions with people, it helps, because you have to realise that 90% of it is hidden beneath the surface. And it's all about drawing that out. So what do? We analyse our own cultural profile first to know about main values of the cultures of your international colleagues. So let's think about us, and then let's think about other people. Because once we know our own cultural profile, we know what we bring into every collaboration, every communication. I know, for example, that I am task-oriented. If I can tick something off my list, I'm happy. It's just my way. It's because where I come from. And my most dreaded word in the Spanish language is imprevisto. If I hear the word imprevisto, I die, because it means that something unexpected is coming up, and I don't know how to deal with it, because that's me. I get very anxious, but in Spain, Spanish people are so good with managing this kind of imprevisto and getting things done despite having imprevistos. So, it's just a difference. There's no one that's better or worse. It's just different. And we're going to blow away the stereotypes here. We have cultural stereotypes that we're all used to. We say everyone in Japan is indecisive. Okay, that's not so, and you have to understand how people in Japan make decisions before you can say everyone in Japan is indecisive. You have to understand what their framework is. And this is all to do with culture. It's all to do with culture. Our suppliers in China never deliver on time. All Americans are only interested in work. You need to understand what type of culture they come from. American culture is very individualistic. It's all about achievement. It's all about, time is money. If you go to another culture where time doesn't matter, you can understand why there might be certain miscommunications and misunderstandings along the way. So we have to really examine this closely. We see things as we are, and we are influenced by other elements of culture that could be our team, could be our organisation, could be national, could be groups we belong to. But if we have in our mind that the same things can mean different things to other people, it helps us a lot. So, status in one culture and status in another, I think the Chihuahua says it all. These are things that it could be for somebody, having the Chihuahua and everything is a status, but having the military medals or being a wise man, he's a senior man, that is status in some cultures. We just have to understand the differences. What is accomplishment for one may not be accomplishment for other. And trust varies significantly across cultures as well. So we like to talk about the gap. The cultural gap concept is where there is any difference between two cultures that actually affects our understanding or relationships. So if we think about what we've said so far, understanding ourselves, if we think about the other person, we can look and see where are the similarities and where are the differences. And when you're working in international teams, it's critical to do this. At the moment, I'm running a project where we are looking at launching something in 9 different countries. My team, I have 2 people from Colombia, 1 person from Lebanon, 1 person from Belgium, German and English. And I would say that the Belgian and English person, they never speak to me. Like, if I'm not in the office, I don't get the Slack messages, okay? I have to go to them and say, guys, you doing okay? Everything all right? Whereas the Colombian and the Lebanese don't stop slacking me all day. Can I ask you this? Can I ask you that? Can I ask you this? It's fundamentally a difference. You know, one needs to be feeling that they constant communication. The other side is just focused on the tasks that we've been given, because we're doing daily huddles, you know, twice a day. And they have a different way of working, a different style. I have to understand that because I have to lead that project and get things done. But I also have to make allowances and adapt my style to people that need me. You know, and when you're leading these projects and when you're involved in these projects, it's really important to have that consideration. How do these different cultural perspectives? I'm just going to run into a couple of them that I feel are really important. I mean, there are cultural profiling has been around for many, many years. There are lots of different studies. We have the godfather of cultural profiling, Geert Hofstede, who, you know, I think all of you know him, the dimensions of power and hierarchy, etc., etc. These studies are done with hundreds of thousands of people across many years. There's lots of, you know, any Harvard Business Review that you might read talks about where there have been, you know, significant problems between cross-cultural communication and how that's affected brands and businesses and people. So there are a lot of different perspectives and lots of different measurements of cultural perspectives. We use a cultural profiler in BBi. In fact, we use several. We have several measurement scores, which can be group, individual, team. You know, we can measure however anybody wants to measure, and we can show up the differences. So, you know, people fill in surveys, they come back, they tell them where they are on these different scales. It's super interesting. I've done my own many times, and I have moved from being purely British to part Spanish. So I'm very happy about that, because I feel that I'm part Spanish in the best parts possible. So, you know, this is really super interesting if you have a multicultural team, to just see where the team is, and you know, monitor and take the temperature and see how we're communicating. But, you know, we can think in a meeting, a virtual meeting, you can think these things. Swedes are always so silent. You know, why is that? My Dutch colleague is so abrupt, direct, very direct communication. My Spanish colleague interrupts me. I mean, these are pretty much stereotypes, but these things do happen sometimes, because for a Dutch person, being direct is the only way to be. And in other cultures, I mean, the British culture is notorious for this. We're always apologising. And we're very indirect when we come to negative feedback. We can be quite direct when we're talking about what needs to be done. But in terms of giving feedback, we're always super indirect. We hate to offend anybody. It's like death to us. So, you know, you can see where these things come from. So how we differ, and I'm just going to talk about a few of these, but, you know, hierarchy and status when we're talking about virtual teams is super important to understand how people perceive hierarchy, how they react to hierarchy, how they make decisions, whether a person comes from a culture that has a focus on group or individual is really important, task or relationship, and then communication styles and approaches to rules, risk, conflict. So you can see here, and I think, you know, it's pretty obvious that, where you have a long sort of hierarchical distance, it sort of looks like the triangle. You've got the boss at the top and then you've got the different layers. So normally when you're making decisions in a sort of long hierarchical distance culture, it goes through the different stages, okay? But when you're in sort of short area, so definitely the Nordics, where everyone is sort of seemed equal and decisions are made by consensus, you can see that you've got two very different styles going on here. So if you're in a virtual team that includes sort of Swedish people or people from Finland, put them together with people from Italy or Slovakia or Portugal or Spain, you're going to have two immensely different styles and two immensely different approaches and values to getting things done and how things should work. So somebody that has maybe a Swedish boss or something may not understand that the Swedish boss allows everybody to have their opinion and that decision takes time because everyone's voice needs to be heard. Whereas in a more strict hierarchy, it may be that you expect the boss to take the decision. So imagine you're in a virtual team, nobody knows what's going on because we have to look at this and think, how are we going to get to consensus? So, really, tips and tricks as far as this is concerned is figure out who's in the group and come up with your plan. Like, how is this group going to make decisions? How is this group going to manage the tasks? I mean, it's all about communication at the end of the day, and communication and understanding. So, for example, you might have somebody that says, this is the way I would like you to do it, because they come from a more hierarchical structure, they're the boss. And you can see the two different cultures. You can see the reaction of the two different cultures, one that's on the short hierarchical, one that's on the long. The one that's on the long says, I really like the way he gives me clear guidelines. This is fantastic. I understand what's going on because I'm from that kind of hierarchy. The other one says, he doesn't trust me. He micromanages me. Same thing, but completely different viewpoint, different understanding of the same situation. So these are the things that I'd like you to kind of like think about when you're dealing across cultures and with your multicultural teams, and even more so in the virtual environment where it's not so clear. Everything in the virtual environment becomes a little bit more sort of set back and not as clear. This is just like going into it in a bit more detail, but you can see that, where you have to go from top down to consensual and from egalitarian to hierarchical. And so you can see that in this quadrant here, this is a very different way of making decisions or hierarchy than most of the rest of the world. I mean, Nina, when you're dealing with the mothership in Sweden, how do you cope?
I don't.
So, we can see, I think, Mar, you said you deal with a lot of people from, is it Mexico and also Turkey?
Yep.
Yeah? And so, they're in different areas. You have to sort of figure out where they are to understand them. So communication, hey, this is the big one. Do we communicate directly or indirectly? And you can see here that obviously Netherlands are known, the Dutch are known to be the most direct people on the planet. And some people, particularly in a virtual team environment, may think they're rude or abrupt. You can think, oh, my colleague is just so rude. How can they be so rude and abrupt? They don't let anybody else talk. Their way is the way. And you can see that, this comes from the communication style. Other people, from the East, Asian cultures particularly, are very indirect in their communication. So you need to understand that in the virtual context, because what they say may not be what they mean. And I found this a lot. In sort of Asian cultures, but also surprisingly to me, in like Mexico. Like I was thinking, like direct, going to tell me what it is, and then you figure out, no, there's all these nuances going on. You kind of have to read between the lines a lot about what is being said. India, can you ever get a no from an Indian person? No, you cannot. They will never say no to you. So when you're on a deadline and you're in your virtual team, you're not going to get a no. You need to figure out another way of communicating to really understand what the situation is. And this is nothing, there's no, and I repeat again and again, there's no wrong or right or wrong. It's just different. It's what is acceptable, values really deep set in different cultures to the rules of the game in those cultures. So this is a fascinating topic. British, obviously, have a way of saying, oh, that's interesting, which means we're saying, that's nonsense. So when you're in a team environment, beware. I'm just giving you the heads up here. It can be really confusing, but it's a fact. We have to get through that. There was an example of a French lady who went to America. And she was a very high flyer, went to America. She was used to a certain style of feedback in France, which is always on the negative. So if you have, we were talking about French school children, weren't we? They always hear the word, no, that's not good enough until the age of whatever. It's just a way of giving feedback is quite brutal, okay? Seems that way to us. And she went to America and she went into her meeting with her boss for her first performance review, and her boss said, I really like the way that you've come into the country, you've seemed to have found your feet very well. In terms of the job that you're doing, there's certain areas that we really need to work on. But I think your fabulous personality and da-da-da-da-da. So she came out of the review and she said, best performance review I've ever had in my life. But actually, he wasn't happy with her. He did the American sandwich. You do something nice, the real point in the middle, and something nice to end. So understanding about feedback and how people communicate is vital to our communication. And obviously, when we're doing this in virtual teams, it becomes even more important that we're crystal clear and maybe check for the other person's understanding of what we've said. Always sort of so can I just sum up that this is what we mean? And you have to be really respectful in all of this and very subtle, because in some cultures, checking what people mean or following up with an email saying what we've discussed can actually freak people out. And they say, well, they don't trust me. So, establishing these rules within the team to start with and bringing it all out and saying, look, we know we're different. We are different. So let's discuss in this team how we're going to work together. It's always worth it, because we often go into these virtual teams thinking, yay, great. And then up come the problems, okay? And then, you've got colleagues on a call. Oh, let's talk about cameras. Let's talk about cameras. How many of you have had situations where people just won't turn on their cameras? And you're like, what? Now, that's because we're like cameras. Yeah, I want to see the other person. But we had a situation, I think it was with Poland, wasn't it? I think it was with Poland, where they just didn't want to put the cameras on. And it was cultural. It was like, I'm sitting somewhere, I don't want people to see me, I don't want people to see my background. There were a lot of things in that. And obviously, when we're working virtually, we also have to understand, yes, we've got backgrounds that we can put on now. We've all got backgrounds. But, some people, they're working in chaotic conditions, and we don't know what's going on in the background. So we have to be respectful of that. But I have to say, for me, and I know it's Swedish way, is just say it, like, could we all turn our cameras on, please? Let's have our cameras on. Now, once you get to know your colleagues, it's different. But when you're establishing communication and you're establishing trust and you're establishing engagement, what's less engaging than looking at nothing on a screen? It's awful. Yeah. So I just bring that out to discuss. But in the meetings, the meaning of silence, this can really vary across cultures. It can mean so many different things. A lot of cultures don't want to speak up in a public forum. So if you have cultures from all around the globe and you're discussing something, you'll find that obviously your colleagues from Netherlands and Germany are going to speak up and they're going to say exactly what they think. But you might find that your Asian colleagues don't want to speak in the meeting, don't want to actually bring up their opinion, voice their opinion in the meeting. So what do? We understand that beforehand, and we talk to those colleagues beforehand, and we say, I'd like to know what your opinion is about this particular subject, because they may not feel comfortable to bring it up themselves, but you need to know if we're going to make decisions, and we might be consensus decision-making or hierarchical decision-making, but we need to understand. And some people, obviously, English is not their first language, and they might be, not happy about their English. They might be agreeing with what you're saying. In an English meeting, if you agree with someone, you probably just don't say anything. You just sit there and go, it's okay. So we have to understand the meaning of silence. And we also have to think about emotionally expressive, unexpressive, avoids confrontation or is confrontational. And you can see again, the quadrant here, Netherlands, Germany, Denmark, emotionally unexpressive, confrontational. And you can see UK, emotionally unexpressive. I don't feel I'm emotionally unexpressive, but anyway. Avoids confrontation, definitely. And then, people that are sort of on the explosive side. I think Israelis are meant to be the most explosive. I've had meetings where I had a meeting once with an Israeli venture capital fund. It was the most frightening day of my life. It was truly scary because it was so direct and confrontational, and it was quite something. And I remember the first time I was in a Spanish meeting, I thought people were arguing. I didn't understand what was going on because at that time I didn't understand the language either. But no, it was just all giving and taking and saying what they thought, and everything was out. So it's just different. We have to understand that. And then you probably wouldn't have noticed, but at the beginning of the presentation, I talked a little bit about the theory, and then I went to the practical stuff, which is the way you do things in Spain. But in the UK, I would have done it back to front. I would have said what you got out of it first, and then I would have gone back through why. Okay, so, how you deliver information also means how you engage people from different nationalities. And this is really, I've seen some examples of this in real life where people maybe didn't think about how people take in information, how they write information, how they communicate information. So it's just something to understand as well. And then this is very interesting because this is trust across countries. And you can see that, this is the World Value Survey, which, looks at, they do this, I think, every 2 years. But you can see here, do you trust, the word trust. So do you trust? First off, do you trust people? And in Sweden, yes, we trust. 65% people say, yes, I meet you, I trust you. 35% say, no, you need to be very careful. You compare that to Brazil. Do you trust this person? 7% say they trust them, and 93% say you need to be very careful. So you can see that even going in to relationships, this is how we are. It's just how we are. So we need to understand where we're coming from. When we're dealing with our colleagues from, Sweden, we know that they trust us from the word go. So let's try not to destroy that trust. And we know that with a Brazilian colleague, we might have to work on it a little bit, And it does come from what we talked about before. It comes from whether you are people-oriented or task-oriented. You can see how important it is to forge relationships with people, or how important is the task? I mean, in the UK, we'd say, yeah, we trust you until you don't deliver. You know, if you don't deliver on a deadline, then we stop trusting you, because everything is about the deadline, everything is about the task. And if you move into the more people-oriented nationalities and cultures, that deadline is elastic. The deadline becomes elastic. Time becomes elastic. And we all know what we're saying here. It's true. Okay, but we're just thinking of it from our perspective, not the other person. And, you know, how can we get through this minefield? Because I've only given you a couple of dimensions there, but there are lots more. And I would encourage you to look into it. You know, Erin Meyer's book is fantastic for like really business situations and understanding different dynamics. So learning strategies to actually collaborate effectively, sort of, you know, we can look at where do we find the most errors, where do we find the most misunderstandings, and then work to actually have, you know, virtual team agreements on how we collaborate with each other and how we communicate with each other. And I would say, you know, always assume good intentions, really. You know, we all want to get on with everybody else. We all want to collaborate with other people. So always assume good intentions. Do clarify the rules. You know, when we talk about the rules of the game, from your point of view, you know, aims, agendas, expectations, schedules, mails, deadlines. Don't be blind to the fact that, you know, different cultures have different norms and different attitudes and values. How do you approach things like small talk, humour? I mean, in some situations, we call it in the UK, we call it banter. I don't know. It's a very odd humour that we have, and we bring it to like meetings. And so it can be really off-putting for people that don't know or from a different culture if you suddenly see two Brits like having a joke and laughing, but they're normally being like, oh, did you get dressed in the dark today? You know, like, we're very rude to each other in that kind of setting, but, you know, this is just the way we are. So understanding that and bringing that to the table is always good. Should you talk about the weather? Should you talk about the family? Again, in our Polish exercise, they do not want to talk about the family. They do not want to talk about religion. All the gossip goes on in the kitchen in Polish companies, just for your information. So how do we translate that to virtual? Very difficult, right? So these things are like the social norms and the business norms. Giving feedback according to the receiver. So, you know, if you have somebody who, as I said before, somebody who you know is not going to bring up their opinions in a meeting, but you really want their opinions to be brought up, tackle it beforehand. Speak to that person beforehand, get their opinion, bring that up for them, you know, helping this collaboration, cross-cultural collaboration. And then, you know, summarising and following up within norms of the documentation, making that sure that you do encourage a speak-up culture and considering what silence means, getting to know each other and enjoying the diversity of perspectives, because that's what we all bring to the table.